get started here in just about a minute. John, hey, welcome. Jeff, glad to see you made it on. Someone can give me a thumbs up in the chat that everything's coming through just fine. That'd be appreciated. Alright, so we are here at 6:30, and so we're going to get started. We'll do a slow start. I know a couple more people will probably be joining, and we are going to be tying the Bunny Leach today. It's a pretty good pattern actually, and so the way it looks when completed is something like this. Pretty simple pattern, just some zonker, and it's called a Bunny Leach because it's typically tied with rabbit zonker, rabbit strips. But really, you can use any strips you get your hands on. There'll be squirrel and others. All of that works just fine. Basically, as you go through here, it'll just be using a strip of hide with some soft hair. Gives lots and lots of movement in the water. Very effective for trout. Very effective for bass. In fact, some of the very first bass flies I've ever tied were on a pattern very similar to this. And of course, there are as many different ways as what you want to name and variants on this pattern as there are for any classic pattern. But we're going to show a pretty simple way to tie it with just a minimum number of materials. All right, so for this today, we are going to be using the PostFly kits and kind of tying the way that those kits are designed. But I'll also talk about some variants that you can do on this, especially if you don't have one of the PostFly kits. We're not too sure how many of these PostFly videos we're going to do here in the Charlottesville program, unfortunately. So, are we having audio issues? Alright. Let me work on that, guys. And let's close it. So that should be coming through much, much louder now. I'm going to go ahead and pause. There's a bit of a delay on my end before you guys see the video. I'll wait until I get a thumbs up, and then I'll go ahead and I'll restart. So, let's see here. Alright, so that sounds much better. Jeff was saying it sounded like when I switched the camera. So I'm going to switch the camera feed over, and now let me know if you can still hear me. If you can't, then I might need to change the setting. So, see if I get another thumbs up here. If so, then I'll go ahead and I'll kind of restart that intro and see how it goes. Oh, that's strange. So, and I made some changes, Jeff, on the fly, so everyone should be able to hear me now. So, all right. Sorry about that. A little bit of audio fun. I'm trying to reduce some echo. I've got a very echoey room. Always trying to make it better for you guys. And of course, as we do that, sometimes we break things. So today we're going to be tying the Bunny Leach. The Bunny Leach patterns, like I was saying before, which you may or may not have heard, it's one of the very first fly patterns I really started tying. And it doesn't need to be tied with rabbit. It gets its name from being tied with rabbit, but it could be squirrel, zonker, a bunch of different variants. Basically, you've got a hide with some soft hair on it, which gives lots of flowing movement, which is fantastic for lots of different predatory species. Trout, bass, you name it. So, alright, so let's talk about this. We're tying today using the PostFly materials, and so we're going to be tying this in a way that those materials were designed for, but afterwards it's pretty quick. I'll be able to tie like 2 of them real fast for you guys. It's not a fly that takes, you know, an hour to tie, it takes 5 minutes. But we'll talk about some variants too and some things that you may want to play with. For those of you who don't have the PostFly kits, you know, don't worry. Again, it's a really simple pattern. You can tie this with lots of different types of material, and hopefully as you see, you can say, oh, okay, yeah, I have these materials, and I can go ahead and get that together. And then the other thing I wanted to say is we're not too sure how many of these PostFly videos we'll do. The Charlottesville program, I know we had some issues getting those fulfilled in time and getting the orders out. Hopefully, you know, those of you who were eligible for the program and who signed up for it were able to get a kit. And for those of you who didn't, I apologize. You know, we won't be doing the PostFly too much more, but hopefully you were able to pick up the bag of materials, you know, again for our participants in the Charlottesville program that we had given to Jake to distribute. For those watching outside the region, as always, thank you for joining. And for those of you who are watching after this aired live, hello. You know, sorry we didn't get to see you live, but feel free to give a comment if you have any questions on the video. And, you know, we look at that pretty regularly and we'll respond if needed. So let's get into the actual materials. In your kit, you should have a little bag of hooks, and let me switch out, make it a little bit easier to see. Some hooks and some cone heads. Again, you know, just any cone head, any hook's going to work. Standard streamer hook. So, you know, we're talking about 3x long, 4x long streamer hooks. You know, if you have anything like that, it's going to work just fine in, well, you name the size. People will tie these for muskie. Obviously, they'll tie them much larger, like 6/0 hooks. People will tie them very, very small for panfish. They're deadly effective for that. So the other thing that we want to do is we want to have some flash. Crystal flash works really well for this fly because it's a little bit stiffer. And the other thing that I want to show you is that it'll be a little hard to see. Let me see if I can't block it. Yeah. So let me switch camera real quick. What I've done is on this package, you can just barely see, I've cut the corner off. And I'll show you why when we get to using it. But if you haven't done that already, you know, you can see why I've done this, and you can make your own decision. It makes dealing with crystal flash in these packs so much easier, and it's a little bit of material management. Always trying to give you guys some tips there. All right. Now the next piece of material we're going to need is so in the kit it's going to be called solder wire. Honestly, any wire will work, right? So there's some lead free. You could use that. Totally up to you. You could use lead wire. I know a lot of you have lead wire from the last fly that we tied, the CK baitfish. That's going to work just fine. Basically, we want to add some extra weight. It's also going to add some stability into this cone head, and you'll see how we achieve that. The other thing the kit's going to have is 2 different packs of zonker strips. So we have one pack that kind of looks like this, and it has a little bit of a thicker cut section. And most importantly, and we'll review this again, when you look at the way that the fur comes off this hide, it's coming kind of like straight off the back. It's not flared out to the side. So when you compare that and contrast that to the other pack of zonker strips, one, it's cut a lot thinner, but the other thing is if you hold it down, you see how this hair is flaring off to the side, hang on, the wrong way. It's kind of coming off to the side like that. This is what's known as crosscut. So if I'm referring to crosscut, I'm referring to this particular pack, and then if I'm just referring to a regular zonker, I'm referring to this, and I'll go over that, you know, every time that I refer to those. All right, so let's go ahead and pop our hook off our vise, and let's get ready to start this fly. Now, as always, first thing I do before I put my hook on is I will go ahead and use my debarb pliers and take off the barb of the fly. So much easier to do this when it's a bare hook versus when you have your fly already prepared. Now, normally at this point we go ahead and we put the hook on and we get ready to tie, and I don't actually know the number of times I've done this wrong. It's a lot. We are using a conehead on this. The same thing with bead head. Any fly where you have that weight in the front, be a big cone, be a bead, something that actually slips over that hook, that has to go on first before we start tying. So to do this on our cone, now most of us should be familiar with this, there is this real thin side with a hole, and then there's the big open end, right? So when you look at the profile of this thing, and let me grab the hackle pliers. When we look at the profile of it, we have a tapered shape, right? A cone, right? That's the name, cone head. So when we put the hook in, the hook point is going to go into the thin end of the cone first, so that when it comes up to the hook eye, that tapered end goes right up to the hook eye. And for those of you who have tied with us in class, obviously we've gone over this. And those of you who tied before, that may seem pretty intuitive, but it's pretty easy to do this backwards, especially when you think, oh, well, it's got to be that orientation. You go ahead and you pop it on, and whoops, now your Bunny Leach has a dog cone of shame collar instead of a nice tapered cone. So anyway, I all the time forget to put the cone on first, start tying, laugh about it, and have to cut the materials off. So next thing we're going to do is we're going to show you a little bit of a trick. I've shown this to some people before. So we have a tendency when we put the hook on, we just kind of put it on. Well, if I have it where, and I'm exaggerating this obviously, where the hook eye is tilted up, look what's happening with that cone. It just wants to come all the way back. All right, so that's the pain. I'm constantly fighting that as I tie. If I put it in pretty close to perpendicular, right, or parallel, where it's nice and level, as I tie, occasionally, I may bump that and it may go back. So anytime that I'm tying with a bead head or a slotted bead or a cone head, I'll actually take the hook and bend it down just slightly. And that's a little bit exaggerated, but that's what I'll do. So now if it slides up, it wants to stay at the end of that hook. It makes it a lot easier when we go to deal with it. Now, the other thing with this pattern is that we're about to really help anchor this in place so it doesn't move. So it's not as critical for this, but this is just a nice technique to use in general. Especially here in the next month or two, we're going to start tying some smaller flies, and some of those are going to have beads. And so, this is a great large pattern to kind of get used to tying with cone heads and bead heads, and get used to these kind of tricks, because they'll be more important when we get to these smaller flies. All right. So next thing we need to do is kind of grab our solder wire, if you're using the wire from the kit, or you can just grab your regular wire if you want to use that one as well. Just kind of peel off where you've got a long strip. I leave it attached just to conserve the materials. And the next thing we want to do is we're going to want to end up with something like 20 wraps around this hook shank. So I'm going to hold one end, and I'm just going to bend the other end over, and I'm just going to kind of count. There's 1, 2, 3. All right, it's about 3, right? So now I'm going to pinch that and start wrapping the other direction. 4, 5. Now let's talk about as I do this. You notice I'm letting go of the wire every time. 6, let go of the wire. 7. Why am I doing that? Well, if you hang on to the wire and you start twisting around and you just keep hanging on to it, you're going to have a tendency to put twist in the wire. And if we start twisting the wire, it's going to break. So by just kind of wrapping up and around and keeping it pinched, it's not spinning around the hook on me. Oh, it's about 8, there's about 9. And I'm not introducing twists. So I can keep doing this. That's about, 11 or 12. We don't have to be exact. There's 13 or so. And there's 15, 16, 17, 18. I'm sure someone will go back and be like, hey, you put in way too many. So that's about 20. So now what we'll do is we'll go ahead and kind of compress all of that together, and we're going to pinch off the end of this. Now this wire is pretty soft, so I can just break it. If you have some stronger wire, just don't use your tiny scissors. There's a couple different ways that you can do it. You can helicopter it off. For me, if it's a tougher wire, that's where the debarred pliers come in. Speaking of debarred pliers, I'm going to take, there's a little pointy end here, I'm going to flatten that out. Now, you can also use a trusty pair of hackle pliers. In fact, we're going to be using these hackle pliers quite a lot. So if you haven't pulled that out, because we're not using hackle, I'd recommend getting that out on your bench, because we are going to use that today to really help with the zonker strips. Alright, so let me explain what I'm doing. So I've got this now, I've got no thread on, and this slides pretty easily forward and back. So we're going to go ahead and slide this all the way forward, where it's nice and tight up against that bead, or cone head. So now that cone head really can't slide anywhere, right? And it's kind of pinned up against that hook eye. Be a little careful, because if you press too hard, you see how it kinks up? So easiest way is just kind of touch that and bring it back down to where it wants to sit level. It'll be a little looser, but it won't slide forward and back. And that will make a little bit of an even fly. So now we're ready to go ahead and put along our thread. So what we've done is we've oriented so that all the weight of the fly is as far forward as really we're going to get it. So this fly is going to sink down. When you fish this, it's going to have a pretty exaggerated jigging motion, which you can control. If you don't like how fast this fly drops, how fast it sinks down, don't put as many wraps on, or use a lighter wire. If you don't think it's sinking fast enough, if you really want this thing to drop like a stone, then put some heavier wraps on, heavier wire, or put more wraps on. But so it's up to you. But anyway, we're going to start for this pattern about 20. So where I'm going to start my thread is right behind the wire, and I'm coming back. Just putting a couple of wraps in, and then I'm going to cut that tag end off. It's much easier to start your thread after you've put your wire on, and starting the thread behind the wire than trying to do it on the wire, because it's going to get stuck in. So Jeff gave a great tip. If you are trying to crank out multiple flies, just getting to a part where you've secured in the wire and you've secured in the cone head, and taking time to do a bunch of those from the assembly line, that will actually save you a ton of time and give you a lot of consistency. In fact, so you can do that for any types of multiple types of steps. So I've got a whole bunch of flies on my tying desk, of some smallmouth Dorito flies. Remember we tied that a long time ago? I got about like 4 of them. That all I've done is put the dubbing on, and I put the tails on, and I put the flash on. And they're ready for me to come back and do the rest of it. Which, if you don't remember, kind of looks like that guy. So that's one of the flies that stays in my hat. Alright, so all fun aside, we've got our thread started. Now what we're going to do is we're going to come back. Now you remember what we did on the CK bait fish, where we came and we did these exaggerated spirals? We're going to do the same thing here. Because if we don't, watch what happens. See how that thread is just going right in between? It's going to start separating that wire out. A little hard to see because it's a little farther away. But by doing the exaggerated spirals, you can kind of play with this on your own. You'll see it actually lays over the thread. And so we'll do a bunch of these forward and back. And all that's doing is giving us a thread base around the wire that then we can come in and kind of just wrap on. Now we don't need to fully cover this. What we're trying to do is make sure that this wire can't go anywhere. So at this point it's pretty secured. Sure, it's not where I've got thread completely over it, but I know it's not going to come undone on me, and it's kind of locked in place. And that's where we want it. So at this point, I'm actually going to bring my fly up level a little bit. I don't have to worry that cone's not going anywhere. and I'm ready to go ahead and tie in my next material. So before we do that, we need to figure out, we need a visual stopping point. So we're going to come back about 2/3 of the hook shank. So I'm kind of not right at the hook point. I'm before it just a bit. Get out my bodkin. So if I divide this hook shank from where the barb is to just behind the hook eye, I divide that in half. That's somewhere around here. And so I'm kind of maybe I'm 3/4 of the way back, 2/3, 3/4, somewhere around that point. That's where I know I'm going to stop putting in my thread, and that's where my materials are going to kind of stop. So now that I have that visually marked, I'm going to bring my thread back up to just behind where my wire wraps stopped. And now I'm ready for my crystal flash. So remember I talked about, and you see a little bit on this, I've actually cut the end, just the corner off of this pack. The other end is open, but I'm not going to mess with that end, I'm going to mess with this end. And what it allows me to do is to come in here with my, this is actually my whip finishing tool, but it has a really nice little hook on it. So if I come in with the whip finishing tool, and I just grab a bundle, and I'm looking for about 4 strands, and a little more than 4. I can start pulling them out, and make that a little easier to see. And this keeps it one where the flash isn't going crazy on me, and it keeps it a little bit more manageable. So I like to keep my flash in the packs. I'm pulling these out real careful so I don't crinkle them up and kink them up. So I like to keep them in the packs, keeps it nice and organized, keeps them straighter, they don't get as damaged, and then I can pull out the exact number that I need. So I've got, I got 5 strands here. 5's good. You know, we just need some strands, right? You can put more flash on, you can put less flash on, really doesn't matter. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to cut these off. And now I'm going to try to find about the midway point. And we've done this a bunch, right? So you just kind of take your flash, kind of come underneath your thread, right? So I'm capturing my thread, and I can kind of put it back over. I'll show that again. But that allows me to pretty easily divide in half. So what I've done, by wrapping around the thread, I can actually pull the thread up and over the hook. See how it's trapped? As I pull down, that flash has nowhere to go except for right where I want it. It's a great way to tie flash in pretty precisely. So at this point I'm going to grab a little flash, kind of lay it back, and just start wrapping it in. And I'm only going to wrap back to that kind of 2/3 mark that we tied before with the thread. And that's it. So now my flash is in place, and I'm ready for the first of the zonker strips. So this one we're not using the crosscut, we're using the regular zonker. And so this is the one, if you remember, it's a thicker strip in comparison to our crosscut. Additionally, if we look at the end, the fur kind of comes where it's in line, right? It's not off to the side versus crosscut where it's coming off to the side. So this is crosscut, this is our regular. So we're going to use our regular strip. Now these are kind of pre-cut all the way up to the end, so it's pretty easy just to grab and pull off. For those of you who don't have, these PostFly packages, you may have ones with long strips. Don't worry, it's just fine. These are actually not cut to the perfect length, so we're going to trim this. So if you've got a longer strip, just go ahead and just follow along, and you'll be able to trim and be able to use it. Unfortunately for us, we have a little bit of waste, but that's not the end of the world. Alright, so we have to find the right length. And for us, the right length is going to be about 1/2 inch behind the hook bend, and coming up about halfway between our 2/3 mark and our, our 20 wraps of our wire. And so I'm just going to lay this on top. Now, if you want to know a really easy way to figure out about a 1/2 inch, it's actually our hook gap. About that hook gap is what you're looking for. And what we're looking for is not the fur, but the actual hide, right? So a little bit hard to see on camera. Let me try to find the right reflection, right? So let me bend it back. This actual hide here, that's what we're measuring. So if I kind of stick that on the hook, I can kind of grab it, and now I have that kind of 1/2 inch mark, and I kind of stick that off the back end. You also can just eyeball this. You really don't stress yourself about, oh, this has to be perfect. Don't worry about it. So we got about a 1/2 inch sticking off the back, not including, obviously, the fibers coming off. And you'll know it's about right when your flash is only sticking up just past the tail. The flash should be longer, but not by much. And now what we're going to do is try to find that point near about halfway between where our thread currently is and that wire. And we're going to start gently kind of parting the fur. And this fur on these strips goes everywhere. You can't see it on film, but there is a cloud of hair around me. And it's unruly, right? You can see how it's just kind of fluffing right back and it's kind of in my way. It's a really easy way to make this stuff more manageable. If you wet your fingers and you go in and you wet the fur, notice how now it's staying out of my way? I can do that on the other side. Now it's super manageable for me. So I can find that tie-in point, part the hair out of the way, and it allows me to trim this zonker to the exact length I need it. Now when you trim it, you'll still have some little hairs. Just kind of pull those out of the way. And the other thing that we're going to do is we're going to take off maybe 1/8 of an inch, right? Not much. Maybe 1/4 inch. Just a little bit to give us a tie-in point. So you can kind of see I've got like a little mohawk now. If you just grab that and very gently pull it, and gentle because this hide will rip, you can kind of pull it off. The other thing that you can do is you can just trim it if you want. It doesn't need to be perfect. We just need to make sure that we're exposing more of the hide because it's going to give us a good tie-in point. The other thing to do to kind of help with the tying in is to come in and just cut a little angle in it. That's just going to make it tapered and thinner, and it's going to allow this to tie in a lot easier. So we're going to place it back down, and we're going to wrap our thread forward. Now, watch what happens when I wrap this. So I have it sitting directly on top of the hook, and as I wrap, see how now it's started to wrap its way around the hook shank? It's a little hard to see, but there's the tension. Even though I'm kind of pulling on the upstroke like we always try, this material is still wanting to kind of wrap its way around the hook. So I'll actually start it a little bit closer to me so that as I pull the thread over, it'll start pulling this strip right in place. And so I do a good wrap forward, and I'll do another wrap backwards. So this is now locked in place. It's not likely to come out easily. So we can advance our thread, and we're going to put our thread pretty much right at the end. So we're going to have this little gap, and now we're going to tie in our next zonker strip right here. The crosscut strips that they gave us in the kits are not long enough to start all the way back here and tie forward. So that's why we want to start a little bit forward and kind of just start pretty close to being behind, these 20 wraps of wire. But you know, if you were tying, not using the kit, and you just have regular crosscut strips, you can start all the way back at this tail. In fact, if you want, you could tie this tail in right at the back of the hook, and then have that cross strip coming all the way forward. It'll just give you more body, more volume on the fly. So, but for our purposes and for these kits, they'll tie just fine and look just fine. Alright, so I've separated out one strip of our crosscut. Again, we know it's our crosscut because this hair is kind of flaring out to the side. And I'm going to separate that. Just gentle pull and separate it off. And just like we did with the last one, we're going to go ahead and give ourselves maybe 1/8 of an inch of tying room. Real carefully, just kind of give it a gentle pull. And we'll pull those fibers off. And so now we have our zonker strip, crosscut strip, ready to tie onto the hook shank. But we want to make sure that when we tie it on, so I have it oriented backwards. We want these hairs where they're pointing towards the tail of the fly. So that's the direction I need to tie it in. Now the other thing is, we're really used to tying things in like this, right? Always when the material's pointing backwards on the fly. Well, the hide on this is pretty thick. So we don't want to tie straight back and immediately have to do a 90-degree angle over, because it's going to look a little weird and it's going to waste material. So instead, we're going to tie this as best we can like this, where it's coming straight down. And so when we wrap around, we're just going to go loose wrap and kind of capture that material in place. So that material is captured now, but you notice how it kind of hangs straight down. That's going to wrap so much nicer because it's ready for that first wrap around. It doesn't have to fight itself. So that's another trick, another tip for you. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to advance my thread. And I've got a rotary vise, so I'm going to use it. I'm going to put a 1/2 inch in. And now I'm ready to go ahead and start wrapping around this fly. So if you don't have a rotary, don't worry, all you're going to do is you're going to start wrapping forward, where each wrap is in front of the previous wrap. Obviously, if you have a rotary, that becomes really easy, and you can just go ahead and wrap forward. Now we're being careful here. We're trying to make sure that we're not trapping these fibers. We're trying to make sure that these fibers are going backwards, right? So as you wrap, you may want to just take your time, kind of like what we did with that bait fish, you know, the last time we were together, right? Just making sure that these fibers aren't getting trapped and allowing ourselves to slowly tie forward. Now, if you get to a point where I know I have to do a few more wraps, but I don't have a lot of room left from where I'm hanging on. Remember I talked about those hackle pliers? Well, those hackle pliers work really well for zonker strips as well. So I'm going to go ahead and take my hackle pliers, grab the end of this strip. Now I got my hands out of the way, and I can continue to wrap forward. And I'm going to wrap this entire strip on. And I'll just kind of get the hackle pliers out of the way, and I'm going to take my thread and wind my thread up. Always, you know, if you get to a point where your thread, you're working way out here, like you can't even see it on camera, just take a moment, hold your material in place, wind your thread back up, and get it so that you're tying close again. So I'm going to go ahead and capture this material in and start coming backwards. You might be a little awkward to capture at first, but you just keep coming back at an angle. Eventually you'll capture a piece of it, and then you'll be able to really go ahead and get some wraps on. And don't worry about having this little thread collar up here in the front of the fly. You want to make sure that these cross-cut strips aren't going to come loose on you. So have a little bit of collar, and that's just fine. So you can see here, you know, for the most part, lots of volume of the fly, and I've got a little bit of a collar up here right in the front. Not a big deal. You're making sure that it's nice and secure, and then you're ready to go ahead and whip finish it. So I'm going to put a quick whip in. Now I was playing around with this earlier today for fun. And one of the things that I noticed, obviously this is a white fly, which is great all year round. Well, I had some fun and decided, what I could do is I could put what we call a hot spot on the fly. Take advantage of the fact that there's this little gap here that we put in just to make sure that that zonker strip is nice and secure. And if I take just a red marker, like a Sharpie, or I think Rick last time had mentioned, I forget the name of it, but a brand of marker that he really likes. And I go ahead and I color that in. Now you don't have to do this, but I think it makes it look like a gill. And I think it makes it a little bit more attractive. So, obviously you don't have to do this. And using a colored thread will do this for you. Like if I tied this with a red thread, I wouldn't have to worry about this, right? That would naturally, that little highlighted hot spot would naturally be there. But the last thing that we want to do is just take some head cement. We're just going to really lock in those thread wraps. So we'll just take a drop of our head cement and really make sure all that gets locked into place. So pretty simple fly. Can be tied pretty quickly. I'm going to tie up one here in just a second. I'll tie a second one. And you can see, I'll just go through all the steps real quickly. Won't do as much of the in-depth explanation. You can kind of see how fast this fly can be tied. And it's up to you guys, those of you with the kits. If you want to tie up, I think they give you enough for like 10 flies or a dozen flies. If you want to tie up a dozen of these, go ahead. If you don't want to and you want to save some of these for some other fly patterns that we may tie in the future, that's fine as well. But that's all there is to it. This is a really simple and effective streamer. You're going to fish this kind of cross current and kind of you can dead drift it, or you can strip it back in moving water, then obviously in still water, do a strip pause technique, where you strip it, it's come up to the surface, and then as you pause, it'll dive down. So, it'll get that exaggerated movement, which is pretty fun. So, all right. If there's any questions, feel free to throw them in the chat. But we're going to go ahead and we're going to tie one more real quick, just so you can see what it's like. We're going to go ahead and debarb our hook first. There's hair just flying everywhere. I'm expecting one to eventually go onto the camera lens, and then you guys will be like, I can't see anything. But, so far so good. All right. So, whoops. I almost do that every time. I want to put that cone head on so the taper end goes forward. I'm going to make it a little bit easier on myself. A little bit down, not as exaggerated as last time, but a little bit farther down. I'm going to use my wire, grab a strip. This time I'm going to use a little longer. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Nice amount to hold. 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17. Anyone tired of me counting? I'll do one more. I could just pinch that right off. It's a nice way to do it where you get very little waste. Use my hackle pliers, flatten out that end, push it right up into that cone, Make sure that cone has some room so it's not just pinched up. So it'll wiggle a little bit, no big deal. And go ahead and put my thread in just behind. Cut off the tag end of that thread. Now we're going to do those exaggerated wraps forward and back so that the thread wraps don't just get caught in between our wire, that we're actually getting around the top of it. Once we have a couple of those in, we can put some wraps forward and back, and we know that's not going to come loose. Now, the next thing that we're going to do is come back to about that 2/3 point on that hook shank. Once we kind of have that visually marked, we're going to wrap our thread forward and go ahead and grab our flash. I had about 2 strands that were just hanging out from the last time I pulled some out. I just left them there, they were ready for me. So there's 2. I only want 2 more, so I like to do 4. It'll result in 8 total strips off the back end. So this time I did a little better, I didn't grab as many. I've got my 4 strips. I can kind of grab that, give them a cut. Might need to sharpen those scissors. And I'm going to grab around my thread and kind of pull it up, allowing me to get these to where I've got them doubled over. So I place it straight down, lay back over the top, start bringing my thread, wrap all the way back to that 2/3 point. And now our flash is on the hook. Next thing we want to do is we're going to grab our regular zonker strips. Again, a little bit thicker in these packs. You know, that fur is coming straight off the back. One of the things I didn't talk about is if you don't have crosscut, don't worry. You can use a regular zonker strip to do those, what we call palmering, those wraps around the body. You just have to be really careful to make sure that you get the fibers out of the way in between wraps. Just take your time, but you can use one pack for it, no big deal. Alright, so this thing is absolutely crazy, hair is going everywhere. Yeah, that you can see. Not all zonker strips are like this, but what we want is about a 1/2 inch off the back. Remember, we can cheat, we can figure that out by just kind of looking at the hook gap and measuring it, or we can just eyeball it. You know, it's something that it doesn't matter too much. So yeah, that's about the right point, and then I'm going to visually mark with my fingers, okay, about halfway in between where that thread ends and where the end of our wire is. So I've got that kind of marked in my hands, and I want to part out. Let me double check. A little long. I'm going to visually mark it and wet my fingers to make this easier. Visually mark it in the hide by separating it out. I know exactly where I want to cut it. Go ahead and cut that. Pull about 1/8 of an inch off. I'm going to cut this. Last time I pulled it off, this time I'll just cut it off. And I'm going to go ahead and kind of cut just a little bit of a tapered angle. It's allowing me to cut it in a little bit easier. And so now I'm going to go ahead and put that zonker where it's a little bit to where as I pull the thread, it'll pull it over top. Right, so it's not directly on top, it's a little bit towards me. So as I pull the thread around, it'll kind of pull it right into place. I'm going to put another couple of good wraps in here. Really make sure that's locked into place. And now at that kind of halfway point between where that thread ended and our weight ended, where our zonker strip is finished, that gives us a nice point to look at to put in our cross strip. So again, this is our cross cut. It's where the fur is coming way out. Pull that off. This time, I'm actually going to pay attention. I'm going to look to make sure, yep, fur is going back this way, hides on the bottom, pull off that 1/8 of an inch. I'm going to cut it again, just because I don't want to risk breaking this hide. So I've cut that little bit. I'm laying it straight down, not on top, pointing back, but straight down, perpendicular to a hook, doing a nice light loop. Show that again. This is worth showing. See how my thread's so loose? I'm just very carefully capturing it. And then I'm going to do another one with more tension, another with more tension, another with more tension. And then I'll go ahead and just make sure that's good and tied in. But that material is ready for that first wrap that goes around. So I'm going to go ahead, utilize my rotary vise by putting in a 1/2 hitch. Again, you can wrap this around by hand. It'll work just fine. I'm going to grab my hackle pliers from the very beginning because I know I'm going to need it to finish the fly. Kind of take the time to get all of these hair pointing in the right direction. Start wrapping it around the hook, where each wrap is just in front of that last one. Wrapping all the way up to that cone head. Now this time, I have a little bit more room, or a little bit more extra material. That allows me to get a thicker collar. So for those of you who aren't tying with these pre-cut strips, but are tying off of larger packs, put some extra wraps up around this cone head and really give it a nice collar. It'll make the fly fish a little bit better. You know, these are pre-measured for this fly for us. And so, you know, we really need to take advantage of every little millimeter that we can. So I've just wound my thread back up. Let me get my bobbin holder out of the way. I'm going to start slowly working my way back until I start capturing it. Now your thread may slip up underneath, so just be careful. And just keep working your way back until you really feel it bite into that material. Unfortunately, that's the best way that I can describe it. So because I had a little bit more material up here in the front, I won't have as much, I won't have to go back as far. You still can, so that's perfectly acceptable. And so this is a way that you, by having the extra wraps closer up into the cone, you can finish it where your thread is just behind that cone and it makes a cleaner look, right? Instead of having a fly with kind of that little gap that we fill in with a hot spot, you'll have something that looks closer to this, right? Where that material's right up against the, that cone. So either way is just fine. I'm going to go ahead though and tie this in so that you kind of see finishing the fly in this way. And I'm not going to worry about putting a hot spot in because you wouldn't really see it because the cone head's going to block it. I am going to go ahead and put in a double whip just because I feel like it. And I'll cut my thread off. And I'm still going to put in some head cement to really help lock these in place. But that's it for this fly. You know, that's kind of all there is to it. It's a pretty simple pattern. You know, it's crazy effective. I'm going to take the time and put some more head cement around it. The only thing about this pattern that you really need to watch is the zonker strip can have a tendency to want to wrap around this hook. I'll show it with one that doesn't have some fresh head cement on it, the one that gets stuck to me. So let me switch camera angles real quick. I'll show you on the wider view. So the only thing to pay attention to with these is this tail, tying it in so far forward like we have, it can make it where it has a tendency to want to wrap around that hook and kind of get fouled. It's not the end of the world if that happens. I actually sometimes will notice that a fish will hit a fly that's kind of messed up like that more than they will regular. I guess it looks like it's injured or dead or something, I don't know. But people have come up with many different ways to try to prevent that. People will put a little piece of, let me grab some. So they'll actually take and tie in a piece of mono, like that, around that hook shank. And they'll kind of glue or fix the zonker tail to it. So it'll be really hard to see on this camera. But the idea is you've got, let me point it out to you. See that right there? Sticking off the back, and then that tail kind of sticks to there. And that'll keep that tail from wrapping around that hook. For me, I just kind of deal with it. I just know, hey, every time that I bring my fly in, let me take a look and make sure if that tail is messed up and wrapped around, I'll just take the time to unwrap it. It's a fly that I'm constantly keeping a look at and making sure that it's not tangled in any way, so that I'll just keep fishing it. That's not the only thing on this fly that you need to kind of keep an eye on. Other than that, fish it as fast or as slow as you want. Fish it, like I said, it's most effective when you cast it in moving water, straight across, and let it swing down the current. You can give it a couple of strips, or you can dead drift it. In still water, it's really effective to do a strip, pause, and it'll kind of dive down, and just strip, pause. It'll kind of give that undulating motion when you do it like that. And that's really, really effective. So yeah, play around with it, have some fun. Other than that, thanks for joining. I hope you guys learned something. So some other updates. We unfortunately, we kind of knew this was going to happen, but because of the state of the pandemic and with it not easing over the summer months like many of us had hoped, we will not be doing any in-person outings, even on the water this year. As always, if suddenly things change, we'll, give that update and be able to do it. But, in 2020, that's not something that how at this time Project Healing Waters feels is safe, and we do need to make sure we're looking after it, because we do have some very vulnerable members of our community. So for that reason, one of the things that I want to work on for you guys, and I'm going to go up and do some filming on Friday. John, you were asking if anyone's gone fishing. I'm going to try to go fishing on Friday. And I'm going to bring some camera equipment along with me, and I'm going to try to start showing you guys, hey, this is how I dissect this particular type of water for this particular type of fish. If you guys have a very specific species of fish within our region, please remember it has to be near Charlottesville. I'm sorry for those of you who are watching from areas around saltwater. I'm not close enough, and I'm not in a position where I can go and stay in a hotel, asthmatic. So it's got to be waters near my house. But I can do bass, smallmouth, largemouth. I can do still water. I can do moving water. Unfortunately, the rivers are blown out. I originally wanted to do, I'm looking forward to the vaccine as well, John. Wanted to do some smallmouth in a river, but the water's blown out from all the rain. I don't know when that's going to happen. So I'm going to try to do some for brook trout. I would love to do grass carp, Jeff, but I can't find any. So if you could get that video when you're feeling a little better, that would be fantastic. But yeah, seriously, if you guys even if it's something like, hey, I want to go after some panfish on a lake because I know it can be really easy and I don't have a boat. How do you do that from the shore? Anything. Just let me know, and I'll try to do something like that. I want to make it so that we have a little bit of variety, so it's not just fly tying. But then again, if you guys are like, no, I look forward to the fly tying, that's what I want to do, give us that feedback as well. We want to make sure that when we do these meetings, these virtual meetings, that it's something that you guys are getting the most out of. Like I said, we're going to try to do I'm going to try to do one on the water for brook trout. We are very fortunate this year because of the rain and because our weather hasn't been that hot. It's been a little bit cooler at night. It is safe to fish for brook trout for the next month. We can't fish for them in October, but we can fish for them now through the end of September, and I'll talk about that in that video. So hopefully that goes well, and then the weather holds, and I didn't just overpromise, but we're going to try a little bit of that variety and see if you guys like that as well. something that enables you guys to get out on the water. That's the other thing that we want to know about. We want to make sure, because fishing is something that can be very safe, right? We can go out, we can fish and stay socially distant. People like to say, well, hey, you're going to be at least 9 foot away because of the length of a fire rod. I like to say the way that I personally cast, people stay at least 50 feet away, at least, because they're usually like, that guy's crazy, I'm not getting close, I'm going to get a hook in the face. So it's a really nice social distancing activity that you can do. You can go out and go fishing, and we want to make sure that you guys feel like you have the tools to be able to do it safely on your own. If there's anything where you're really nervous about it, shoot, you can email me if you don't want to put it in the comments. For those of you who have my email address. For those of you, it's vaflytying@gmail.com. Those of you who are watching that aren't in our local program, and we monitor that email as well. So, yeah, Jeff has been in a boat with me, and many times. It's like, duck, Jeff. So, but, all right. And with that said, as always, continue to stay safe. We are all counting down the days to when we can get back together, and looking forward to it. Hopefully that's sooner than later, but we'll continue to play it safe for everyone. And have a nice night. I hope you guys had fun, learning something tonight. And again, give us some feedback. Let us know how we did. And let us know if there's something specifically that you guys are wanting to see. So take care and have a good night.